consistency over perfection. It's what you do most of the time that's going to drive that progress. Having a few days here and there that aren't perfect, or that maybe, aren't according to your nutrition plan, exercise plan, is not going to derail the progress that you're making. And just focus on what you can do and trying to be consistent, not perfect.
Talking about how to build muscle. Now, this is something that sounds like, oh, I just need a strength train for it. And that is not correct. Strength training is one piece of the puzzle, but nutrition and recovery, they play really big pieces as well. So today I am bringing back registered dietitian Nicole, and she is going to talk about the nutrition side of things. Now, before I bring her in, I want you to know that when it comes to the strength training piece, if the goal is to build muscle, you need to be working with heavy enough weights in the appropriate rep range to make that happen. And we need to apply the principles of progressive overload, where we are actually challenging our muscles enough that we are able to break down muscle fibers. Now, once we break down those muscle fibers from the work we're doing in our strength training, that's when the nutrition piece comes in to help rebuild those muscle fibers. And I think this is the perfect time to bring Nicole into the mix. Hey, Nicole.
Hello, Colleen. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Not bad for a Tuesday.
Awesome. I don't know if you heard what I just said, but I told our listeners that when it comes to building muscle, it's not just about the strength training piece. The nutrition piece plays a really big role. And when we are lifting in the appropriate rep range to build muscle on average, and there can be some nuance to this, but we're typically lifting in an 8 to 12 rep range. We're looking to build muscle. A lot of times you're going to hear the term hypertrophy thrown around in the mix there. So when we are working in that appropriate rep range, lifting heavy enough weights, we're breaking down these muscle fibers. And then after the work, we need rest and we need the right food. So can you explain, can you take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love the point you're making that, of course, that your exercise program is going to be a huge foundation for the muscle building process. But nutrition is super important because you're putting in all that work to break down those muscle fibers. And then you need to make sure that your body has the tools in order to repair that and build upon what you've broken down. And so, it's a very common, I feel like, mistake that people make when it comes to muscle building, because society loves to, I guess, demonize eating more calories, eating more nutrition. But to build muscle, you need extra nutrients. You need more energy, more protein, more carbs. And so, post-workout, you want to aim for getting in at least 20, 30 grams of protein within that hour. And then carbs, like even up to like a 3-to-1 ratio, I would say. So if you're getting 20 grams of carbs, you want 20 grams of protein, you want 60 grams of carbs in that 60-minute window where you've stimulated that muscle protein synthesis. And so in that hour to 2 hours after that hypertrophy training is when your body and your muscles are going to be really ready to absorb all that nutrition and repair and kind of just optimize recovery as best you can by getting in that mix of protein with the carbohydrates right after.
So I think the last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about macros as a whole. And we did, because you called out the point where I said our macros are protein, carbs, and fats, and you made sure to say, and alcohol as that fourth category.
Right.
Can you explain why it is the protein and the carbs that we are primarily looking for over the fat?
Yeah, great question. And I actually saw something on your story the other day that I appreciated. It was something about how you're kind of giving an analogy to protein and carbs when it comes to muscle building. You're like, protein are like the building blocks or like the packages, and carbs are like the delivery driver to like drop them off. And I really liked and appreciated that analogy. So yeah, the carbs, obviously, the protein is going to be the amino acids, the main component of repairing the muscles, where our body is using the amino acids to make those repairs, which you get from obviously the proteins. And then the carbs are going to be kind of what fuels that process, what gives your body the energy to repair those muscles, which is super important. So I did really like that analogy that I saw. And I think that, yeah, explains it perfectly, actually.
So it's not that like we don't like fat, just like doesn't help us with this specific goal. Is that correct?
Right. Right. So fat, like you're saying, it has other important functions, and there's other reasons why we still need a certain amount of fat in the diet for hormones and things like that, and satiety and like flavor. But that is the macronutrient that we don't necessarily need to be prioritizing when you're in a muscle building phase. So that's why lower fat, higher protein, higher carb is typically the best way, the most efficient way. Not saying you can't build muscle, eating, differently than that, but to optimize it and make the process as efficient as possible, definitely want to prioritize the proteins and the carbs ahead of the fats, for sure.
Now, when it comes to building muscle, do you have to eat at maintenance? Do you have to eat in a surplus? Could you be in any type of a deficit and still build muscle from the nutrition standpoint?
You definitely can. And it is harder to do it like that. That's a lot of people when they're trying to aim for like body recomposition, we can sometimes play around with a very slight deficit. And that's the key there, is very slight. If you're under eating too much, again, you're just going to make it harder for your body to build muscle and have the energy to do so. But it's not impossible. You have to be a little bit more cognizant of protein intake, like really prioritizing a lot of protein, and then being pretty on top of ensuring you're in that very slight deficit. And it will be a slower process too, of course, since you're not getting those extra calories and energy from being in a maintenance or surplus. So that it's going to be definitely slower going, which can be frustrating for some people, but definitely not impossible.
So for people who are open to being in maintenance or even open to being in a surplus to build muscle, what are the benefits there?
Yeah, so it's going to be definitely faster, more efficient being in like the maintenance or surplus. So you'll likely see that muscle growth a little bit more quickly and notice the benefits and see the benefits of the training and all the hard work you're putting in a little bit quicker. And so, yeah, you kind of have to meet people where they're at. If they're comfortable with being in a surplus, and they'll likely be able to do it a little bit quicker. Sometimes we also like to work with people in phases. So do like a muscle building, like surplus phase, and then go into it, like build that base muscle, and then go into a little bit of a cut. So you can shed a little bit of the fat, but try to maintain as much of that muscle as possible, and do it in phases can be another efficient way to kind of go about that process.
I love the phases. I have gone through all of the phases with Hillary now over the last 4 years.
Amazing. Yeah, so you know all about it.
And I think it's really cool what you just said about you really just need to meet people where they're at. I think, anytime I've talked to any of my personal clients about like, oh, I'm going into a surplus, they were all like, I don't want to go into a surplus. And I'm just like, you don't have to, but I want to. Like, this is a choice for myself. And I think it's just common, especially for people who are on this page. And I think a lot of people who are here or who have been attracted to the content that I've shared, where I did overcome a 10-year eating disorder. And the idea of going from skinny to strong was really scary in the beginning. Like the thought of I'm going to eat more to build muscle was really tricky to overcome in my mind. Is that anything that you ever talk about with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a super common mindset. It's one that I can relate to as well. I went through a period of life where I had the same, I guess, view on nutrition, was scared of calories, was scared of eating too much. And yeah, and it's one of those things that, again, it just takes talking to someone and having those conversations and really trying to put in the effort to learn and being open to change, especially like experimenting. You can always, go back to what you're doing before if you don't like, the change that you've made. But it's a very common conversation that I have with clients. And so that's why it is so important to meet people where they're at, because it's a slow process, like changing not just habits, but also mindset. Mindset shifts are really hard. But that's why it's important to reach out to professionals and people that you can trust. And yeah, and just like having those conversations and being honest with not only them, but yourself as well.
Can you give us some insight in that case? Because I would imagine anybody who's listening to this at this point in time is feeling like very comfortable, very safe. Like if you ever want to reach out to Nicole or myself, we're going to meet you where you're at. What does it actually look like if you are, trying to build muscle? And let's say you are in maintenance or a surplus. And maybe we should pick one. You tell me. Realistically, how much muscle could I put on within a week, a month, a year? And I know training age depends on this. So anybody who's listening and you're thinking to yourself, what's training age? If you're brand new to lifting, you get to reap the benefits of something called newbie gains, where you can potentially like go from zero to not like somebody's, 30th year, but you can make a lot of progress really quick in comparison to somebody where it's like, I've been doing this for years. But realistically, when we are looking to build muscle from a nutrition standpoint, what am I going to see change in terms of my overall calorie intake? What might I see differently on the scale? What are some pieces from that part that you can shed light on?
Yeah. So, I mean, from obviously caloric standpoint, maintenance or like typically a slight surplus, especially depending on how comfortable that person is with the surplus, like just a couple hundred calories difference. Of course, protein is going to be a little bit different as well. I'm trying to build muscle. I know a lot of people like to say like 1 gram per pound of body weight. Actually, that's a little bit on the higher end of what I would recommend. Like,
What would you recommend?
max, I would say. Yeah, I would typically recommend around, and we do it based on kilograms of body weight. So 1.8 to like 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for like an adult trying to build muscle. And from like a rate, I know you asked about the rates, right, of like muscle gain. So, and like you mentioned, beginners, they're going to gain that muscle a little bit quicker. So that can be like, if they're at maintenance, around like half a pound of muscle to like a pound and a half maybe per month if they're really consistent with their training. People who are at like more intermediate advanced phases might be probably a little bit slower than that, like maybe half a pound to a pound a month, maybe a little bit less than that, actually, like quarter of a pound a month, depending, again, and this is at maintenance, I would say, where it's not, and that's to, again, try to mitigate fat gain and stuff like that, if depending on how comfortable the person is with being in a surplus versus at maintenance, it will impact the speed. But, and sorry, what were the other questions?
Just looking at, what does that look like? Something that was really cool is this last round of swing to snatch. My one sister-in-law was in the program, and my sister-in-law, I would say she's somebody who definitely has more of like a skinny type of a build, was not working out, wasn't doing any type of strength training, did a couple of like Kayla Itzen Instagram workout videos, but like never really touched weights and never knew anything about macros. And Hillary did her macros while she was in swing to snatch, and she started lifting kettlebells consistently 5 times a week for 4 months. And the amount of definition you saw on her arms, her abs, and her ass were really impressive, knowing how short a time frame that was. And even my own experience when I first started lifting, I noticed a lot of changes relatively quickly. But I think it's so different depending on where you're currently at on the journey. When you have somebody who maybe that isn't where they're starting, like they're not in that skinny body, they're not in that skinny fat body. Maybe they have a body where it's like, I still have body fat that I want to lose.
Yeah.
I think it can get kind of frustrating sometimes for people, because like if I am gaining the muscle, I might see the scale go, but like that's not the indicator of what it is we're necessarily like focused on? Do you ever have to talk
Right.
clients through that stuff when it comes to we're in
Yeah,
a building phase?
absolutely. And that's, the frustration up is a big factor, just impacting the motivation to kind of continue and seeing because we want that instant gratification, right? People want to see results fast. And unfortunately, body changes, stuff like that, nutrition changes aren't quick processes. So yeah, definitely encourage. And that's why I like to encourage people to use other ways to measure progress, right? Other than just the scale, because the scale doesn't show us the full picture, as I'm sure you know. So you can definitely, I know a lot of gyms these days have like body composition, like in body scans. We could like assess muscle, or like DEXA scans to assess like muscle, if that's a realistic resource to assess muscle mass, fat percent, body fat percent, stuff like that. Also noting how clothes are fitting. If you are able to, I know you in the beginning mentioned increasing like reps or increasing like weight, like amount of weight that you're lifting. That's a really good sign of muscle growth. Energy levels, how people feel, measurements, even like around with the parts of your body that you're exercising regularly. So many other ways to measure progress rather than just focusing on the scale, because it's often not a good representation of everything else that's going on, all the other changes that are happening in your body. So,
are you ready to start building strength but feel overwhelmed by complicated workouts and influencers on social media? Foundations is your answer. If you're new to strength training and want a simple, effective way to get stronger, build muscle, and drop body fat, Foundations was designed just for you. What you'll need to get started are just 3 kettlebells. That's it. These 3 kettlebells are all you need to unlock your strength, start building muscle, and start seeing real results. There's no fancy moves, no complicated routines, just the basics that will help you to progress safely and confidently. What you'll get when you join: simple, proven exercises where you will master foundational movements like squats, deadlifts, and presses that will give you strength and confidence. A progressive training program, step-by-step video and written guidance to help you improve no matter where you are starting from. A safe, effective training routine. You'll get to focus on form and build a body that's strong from the inside out. And the best part, it's DIY. You can start right away, no waiting around. You just buy the program today and you get to start building strength from the comfort of your home. You don't need to be fancy to get strong. You just need a solid foundation and the right approach. Foundations is perfect for the woman who is new to strength training and wants to take it at her own pace. She wants to feel empowered, she wants to feel strong, and she wants to feel more confident in her body. If you're ready to begin, visit www.colleenconlon.com for more details and grab your Foundations program today. Again, all you need are 3 kettlebells. I'll take care of the rest.
I think we could probably do a whole live on that alone. And there's still other things that we want to talk about within these next 13 minutes. So for anybody who's thinking like, oh my gosh, what are all these other things that I could be doing? You can reach out to Nicole or myself in the DMs and we can give you some additional strategies, because there are a lot. But do you think there's anything else because again, I think just the conversation of how to build muscle is something that is a lot deeper than what we can necessarily cover just in this time frame. But do you think there's anything else that we need to touch upon other than, if you are trying to build muscle, we need hypertrophy. We need ideally that 8 to 12 rep range. We want to focus in on compound lifts. We want to aim probably somewhere between like 3 to 6 sets of those compound lifts. If you're curious to learn more about the strength training component, just send me playbook in the DMs and I will break down all of that for you in a PDF form. But Nicole, when it comes to building muscle, is there anything else that you want to either reiterate or shed a little bit more light on before we talk about fueling for performance?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, and this might play into fueling for performance, but also plays a role in muscle gain and building. But like I know we talked about post-workout nutrition, but pre-workout nutrition is also pretty crucial. Trying to make sure you're getting a good amount of carbs, a little bit of protein, to make the most out of your workouts. You'll be able to, optimize your performance in that exercise, which is going to then, increase the amount of muscle that you're able to build, push a little bit harder, go a little bit further in those movements. So pre-workout nutrition is also a pretty crucial component, on top of the post-workout, kind of paired together, of course. And then I know we already talked about making sure you're not under eating, prioritizing the protein intake, and not just with the protein, also trying to spread it out throughout the day is super important, making sure we have a pretty consistent influx of those amino acids and nutrients versus I know a lot of people like intermittent fasting or doing like just one big meal a day or two big meals a day, but it makes it really hard to get in that consistent protein intake because muscle building is a 24/7 process. When you do like the hypertrophy training, when you break down those muscle fibers, our body is going to be repairing those muscle fibers for days following that exercise. So you need a pretty consistent influx of that fuel, of those amino acids, of the protein, the carbs. So so not just hitting the numbers necessarily, but also the timing of things is super important for muscle building.
You made a comment about, and I'm bringing this up because I actually had a client who was talking to me about how she eats a lot of her protein within like a window of the day. Is it a matter of if you can hit it all in a relatively short time frame, it's okay, or it's like no? Like, why is everybody talking about intermittent fasting? I'm like, why? What's going on?
Yeah, why? I know it's such a hot topic. And again, I think that just ties into what we were talking about with like calorie restriction. It makes it easier for people to be in that deficit. But again, that's not what we're looking for when we're trying to build muscle necessarily. And so I will say, like, again, from I guess like internal process, like the muscle protein synthesis is going to be more efficient when we have a more spread out intake of the protein versus doing the bolus feedings of the protein. Our body is going to utilize it a lot more efficiently when it has in smaller amounts, but just more consistently throughout the day is the best way to go about that. Will optimize that process a lot better than the bolus feedings of the protein, I would say, for sure.
If you have like a day or two where you hit a lot of it just in one meal, should we take that as like, I'm doing okay, or like, oh fuck, I fucked it up?
Yeah, and I always say that like a day or two of the nutrition not being optimal or not being like according to plan is not going to derail progress. Totally okay to have days like that, and it's healthy to have days that aren't, we're not robots. It's impossible to eat the same thing in the same way and hit the same numbers every single day. So I think it's perfectly okay to have a couple days that don't align maybe necessarily to what we classify as optimal. But it's what we do consistently that's going to drive that progress. So if you can be more consistent with that, spreading out that intake and all those other things that we talked about, that's where you're going to start seeing that progress for sure.
Awesome. When it comes to fueling before we work out, I know you said pre-workout fuel, and I typically talk on my page about like eating pre-workout, but I've had people make comments like, oh, should I be taking pre-workout too? And I think there is a confusion between you eat before you work out versus you're taking a pre-workout supplement.
Right. And I don't dislike supplements or anything like that, but I am someone who encourages food, like whole foods first. And again, they do fuel us better than supplements for most. Yeah. So whole foods, great question. So whole foods, and just for an example, like I know because we've been talking about protein and muscle building. So whole foods are going to be more effective at building muscle than supplements or eating like isolated protein, because they have other nutrients. They work synergistically with one another. So for example, a whole egg is actually going to produce, I think it's something like 40% greater muscle protein synthesis than just doing the egg whites by themselves, because the egg yolk has a bunch of other nutrients that help to just optimize body function and making sure that we're getting all of the nutrition that we need, not just like picking one, like just protein or just carbs or something like that. We're getting a lot of micronutrients that help in a lot of other ways that maybe we don't even fully understand or realize yet. So whole foods are definitely the way to go for post-workout and pre-workout. Supplements, not saying again that they absolutely are helpful for supplementing and just making, certain, just improving the nutrient composition of certain snacks and meals for sure. But prioritizing the whole foods for pre-post workout is definitely more encouraged, I would say.
And then I know in a lot of the pre-workout supplements, there are carbs in a lot of them, but one of the big things that they push in a lot of them is caffeine. Is there a difference between eating carbs and like having caffeine or a cup of coffee? Like, have you ever had the conversation with a client where they're just like, I feel great, I have a cup of coffee or I have a double espresso and then I work out and I like crush it?
Right. And that's another awesome question and important to touch upon as well, especially since we've been talking about the muscle building. So caffeine, sure, it's going to give us that mental stimulation, but it's not going to give us that physical, it's not nutritive. It's not giving us calories or physical energy. It's giving us mental energy is kind of how I put it. So with that, caffeine can be helpful when it comes to, because exercise, as much as it is physical, there's definitely a big mental component too as well. So the caffeine can definitely help with that and help with just like optimizing the performance a little bit. But we definitely want to have, if you're going to have caffeine, having some carbs with it for the physical fueling to, again, optimize just our body's output, our performance during the exercise, stuff like that. So both are okay to do pre-workout, but definitely don't want to do just the caffeine for sure with that.
So if you are going to have carbs before you work out, is there a number? Is there a range for people? Is it one of those situations again where it's like, well, this depends? Anything that you can share with us?
Yeah, so it's a big, the pre-workout nutrition timing is a pretty big component, a pretty big factor, right? So if you have a couple hours, you can get in like a full meal with some good carbs, some protein, some fats, things like that. And typically, a lot of people I find when they say pre-workout, they're meaning like what they have 30 minutes before an exercise or like right before. And so with that, I typically encourage, and it depends on like you were saying, like the intensity of the exercise, the person, how long you're planning on exercising for. But typically to top off right before, aiming for about 30 to 60 grams, somewhere in that range is a good starting point. And you can always, depending, on the person who you are, you might need more, might need less than that, but that's typically a good starting point. And making sure they're quick digesting carbs because you don't have a lot of time before the movement. So I want to make sure they're simple, easy to digest. So like pretzels, you could do like a sports drink, eat like crackers, simple things like that, gummies, whatever you have that you digest pretty quickly.
When I first started implementing pre-workout food, I don't know. This was definitely not Hillary's recommendation to me, but I started eating a lot of Rice Krispie treats.
Oh, okay, that's a good one.
And in the beginning, because when I first started working with her, I was definitely of the mindset where there are good foods, there are bad foods, there are like clean foods or foods that I should stay away from. And I'm at this point now in my journey where I don't believe that. But I remember feeling really conflicted, thinking like, am I actually like hurting myself by eating Rice Krispie treats before I work out?
Yeah.
Can you talk to that?
Yeah, that's a comment. I know people get so surprised when I'm like, oh yeah, eat like a cookie or eat like your Halloween candy before a workout or something, or your Easter candy. I've been telling people recently, they're like, what? You're telling me to eat candy? And so, yeah, and that's a really great and actually a very strategic timing for those foods to enjoy them, like aiming before a workout. Our body's going to utilize those sugars a lot, like very efficiently, very quickly. And we're going to put those to good use because they're going to be fueling our movement. So a really great and strategic time for those fun foods. And I encourage people, especially even people who are dieting or like in a cut phase or deficit phase, I should say, to still incorporate those foods. And sure, but in being strategic with it. And that way you can still have those fun foods, but it's also helping move you in the direction of your goals and supporting your progress too. So no, I love that. Rice Krispie treats. Me and my roommate, we do like little cookies before we do exercise or go surf or do something fun. So yeah, a great strategic and good timing for foods like that, actually.
I love that. And I want to remind everybody who's listening to this right now, Nicole is the fucking expert, not the influencer that you are seeing on Reels talking about don't eat candy, don't eat these things. You heard it from the expert. You can do this. It can be in alignment with your goal. And if you are on my page, I know there is a part of you that either cares about being really fucking strong or getting that toned aesthetic, and you can have candy and do that. It just has to work with the strategy.
Right. Right. All foods fit. We can fit them in somewhere, I promise.
Nicole, I know we're getting to the top of our time. I just wanted to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have a little bit more wiggle room?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Is there anything to keep in mind in terms of those who are trying to put on more muscle and they don't already have a whole lot of fat to lose versus those who already know that they have to build the muscle, but there is going to need to be a fat loss phase at some point as well? I think I saw a comment from somebody in the threads. I'm just going back right now asking about the fat loss component. And me and Nicole are going to do another live talking more about like what it looks like to be in a deficit and how to do that in a healthy way. But, you know, I've experienced this personally when I went from like the skinniest version of me to a stronger version. And then this past year, I went into a surplus and I gained the most weight that I've ever had on my body. And, you know, I think when people hear I need to eat more to build muscle, depending on if you're on the lower side or if you're on the higher side, you're going to need that fat loss phase. It can be a little confusing to hear this information. Is there anything that one versus the other needs to do different in regards to the building of the muscle?
Okay. So, and then you're saying so between someone who is trying to prioritizing more fat loss versus someone who's maybe not prioritizing as much fat loss, if there's a huge difference between those two
Let me
goals?
be more specific. Okay, so we have person A who is skinny or skinny fat, and then we have person B who maybe they have like 30 pounds that they need to lose, or that if it's 30 pounds, maybe you don't actually need to lose it, but maybe you want to lose it. If both of these people want to build muscle, does it look different from a nutrition standpoint in terms of what they're going to do to get there?
It's going to look pretty similar, honestly. And again, meeting people where they're at, like how comfortable someone is when it comes in, you know, again, if we're working in the phases, if both of those people are doing the phases, then it's going to be sure. Yeah, we want to do maintenance or a surplus and then go into a cut. That would be the same for both of those groups. So very similar processes, I would say, and would look very similar. But again, I mean, people are different, so going to be some slight nuances. But overall, just general guidelines and the approach that I would take with both of those would be a pretty similar strategy for both of those clients.
And for anybody who's wondering, does anything change with your strength training stuff depending on where you're at there? No, it doesn't. We're going to focus in on progressive overload. We're going to lift really heavy stuff. When we end up doing our next talk and talking about like the deficit, there is a little bit more nuance there that I would encourage certain clients who are in a deficit in regards to the strength training piece. But if you're trying to build muscle, we got to lift heavy and we got to challenge your body. That's how it's going to happen.
Right. Exactly. You said it. That's 100% agree.
Nicole, do you have anything else that you would like to share with our listeners in regards to building muscle or supporting performance regarding nutrition before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, just reiterating kind of what we already talked about, just consistency over perfection. You know, it's what you do most of the time that's going to drive that progress. having a few days here and there that aren't perfect, or that maybe, aren't according to your nutrition plan, exercise plan, is not going to derail the progress that you're making. And yeah, and just focus on what you can do and trying to be consistent, not perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If this episode hit home, don't forget to leave a rating and review. Women are stronger together, so share this with a woman who you want to see rise. When we embrace positive takeaways, we level up, and when we share them, we change the world. Follow us on Instagram at The Dangerous Women Podcast and let us know what you want to hear next. And remember, dangerous women redefine wellness and the world. So be fierce, be authentic, be dangerous.